Hi, I'm Nathan Hammond, and I'm going to talk at you. Good evening. We're going to have a brief conversation this evening about what it means to build a secure browser single-page application, and especially what that means in a single-page application context, and even more especially what that means in an Ember context. Now, building a secure application is not exactly some simplistic knob that you can turn left to right, set and forget it, and say, you know what, I'm secure, we're done here. Unfortunately, that is not how it works. And in fact, there aren't just two little spots on this dial. No, indeed. There are, in fact, an infinite number of spaces between insecure and secure, and it all depends on how much work you want to invest in that process. So, when you're thinking about security, you often have it portrayed to you as if there's just some sort of magic defensive incantation that you can provide, whether that's a content security policy or make sure you always escape the things, or you just start praying. I prefer that one. That's surely going to work. But there's not just some magic incantation. So unfortunately, there's a lot of work you still have to do. The people that are attacking us are not just some automaton running a script. They're actually intelligent. There's a man inside the box, and they come up with really, really, really clever methods of attack. In fact, some of them are so clever, like once I've seen them, I'm now just absolutely astounded. We've had, so I work for LinkedIn, and we've had people use our own CSS against us. It's kind of crazy. And so security is really important these days because some assholes like to start, I have political opinions. Some people happen to be considering data collection a portion of their job. And so the threat landscape is constantly evolving. And the way in which we defend ourselves, we have to adapt in order to be able to survive in this new world, especially when our attackers are at the nation state level. So, hi, I'm Nathan Hammond. Here's my contract information in case you want to bug me. It's partly my job to make sure that LinkedIn's mobile website is actually secure from jerks like the NSA. This isn't my full-time job. It's just one of the hats I wear. The black one or the gray one, I'm not really sure. But we have an entire team of wonderful people whose job it is to do this. And we do great work, hopefully. So let's start talking about all of the things that you shouldn't do, because that makes it easier to find out what we probably should do. And the easiest way to get your application owned is when you find out, often the hard way, that you've committed a security faux pas. Considering it's a little bit close to the Super Bowl, it's kind of like a wardrobe malfunction. Now, it's somewhat intentional, but not really planned, and you don't really know how the outcome's going to go, and then you get sued for millions of dollars. It's actually kind of what happened. So now for all of you nerds in here, like me, who don't really watch the Super Bowl, let's actually talk about the kind of 3 anti-patterns for security. So what happens if you have an insecure default? Anybody care to guess what this actually does? Crickets. Okay, so fine. We'll just do a little demo here because that's how we roll. And maybe, whoop, let it be. And we now have insecure defaults. That is the exact same code that you just saw. And you got owned, and you have no idea why. Well, it turns out that jQuery itself does something really friendly for you. It's called data type inference. And if it doesn't know what to do with it, it starts by trying a JSON parse. And then it says, what else could this be? Is it XML? No. What if maybe it's a script? And then it passes the random thing that you just called in to get into a val. Whoops. Exactly. And so this is actually in jQuery 2.1.4. So if this is in your application, you're in for a bad day when somebody finds it. Anyway, hopping back, we're going to just kind of look at this and go, okay, that's actually real. This is your current nightmare. Go check your apps tonight. But it could also be something as simple as using HTTP. That's an insecure default. Anybody along the wire can actually insert content into your page. So all of the rest of you who didn't have that first vulnerability, go port all of your sites to HTTPS everywhere tonight, because I'm sure that's a real simple process. All right. It's bad when you make yourself laugh, isn't it? But anyway, so we're talking about combining content and control channels now. This is a really, really, really great way to end up with your application owned as well. How many people have ever had their database hacked? There are a lot of people in here who are not raising their hands, and I'm not sure I believe you. Back here? So when we're talking about combining your content and control channels, if you've got a SQL query, what happens when it happens to jump over the boundary? You now have what was originally content now executing in your commands. And unfortunately, we designed this language called HTML, which combines the content and control channel everywhere. So good luck with that. And in fact, if you happen to have an image tag and they were able to pass in the source as an arbitrary value, and then they just added a little quote down there at the very end, and then they add non-load, and then you're screwed. And so that looks a little bit like, hold on, alerts are modal. Loop-de-doop. A little bit like this. Looks a little fishy. And again, that's exactly the same code that you just saw. I agree with Tomster. All right, so third way you can actually end up with yourself completely owned is trusting user data, or really any data, because I promise you that your content admins, whatever, whoever else is editing code in the CMS, they don't know enough. They're going to copy paste that code from somewhere, and that's going to cause just as much trouble. So you pretty much can't trust anybody. And then so you take it and you set your document body in HTML, and then you get this nice friendly little alert that says owned again. And I'm not going to demo that one. So the easiest way to make sure that you have a secure application is to make sure you don't trust anybody. I'm sure that makes building apps easy, or you could just have an entirely static application. A brochure, you know, go back to like 2006 and the pre-internet days. So Ember's approach is a little different. What if we said, these are the kind of problems that we're going to encounter when we're building a security-focused web application? Well, what could we do to make that better? Ember says, you know what? APIs are only as good as the person who is able to use them, and if the API doesn't make it easy to use it, then it's actually the API's fault. It's not the user's fault. And you can file bugs, and somebody in the back of this room might fix them, like you take it and you say, you know, this API is not secure. This API is going to result in tremendous mistakes from our users. And so we say, that's a bug, we should fix it. We should make it more difficult for you to actually ship a bug than it is to actually do the feature correctly. So that's part one of Ember's approach. Part two, separation of concerns. So back in the old days, in the pre-HTML bars world, we took and threw everything in with inner HTML. We just saw how it was relatively easy to jump across a boundary if you use inner HTML, because it's actually taking and treating all of that content as a single HTML string. Well, we fixed that. It's called handlebars, and handlebars literally parses your HTML for you, and it generates document.createElement, div, document.setAttribute, blah. And so you can no longer actually jump between your content and your control channel, most of the time. And so we now construct our HTML using DOM functionality. And so that makes it a lot easier to guarantee safety because we have actually implemented templating. It's the same solution that we use for SQL injection prevention. So we've shown that it works and it makes our applications more secure. And the third thing is trust nobody. We don't allow any place inside of Ember to use privileged APIs. We don't allow anybody to hop in. And in fact, if they are going to make something insecure, they have to do something to denote that they're doing it insecurely. You have to either A, insert something with triple mustaches. How many people use triple mustaches? I'm going to start throwing things at you. So you can use triple mustaches. You can use ember.html_bars.safestring. All of these things are escape valves for when you're doing something that you probably shouldn't be doing. But every now and then you find yourself in a really weird situation, and that's the easiest way out. You have to make sure that you audit your application in order to do that. So don't trust anybody, especially me. So we're going to kind of switch speeds a little bit here. I was going to actually do a demo of all 7 of the Ember vulnerabilities since 2013, but we're only going to actually do a demo of a couple of them because that was all of the time I had to get because I was reverse engineering the vulnerabilities because we don't actually include all of the exploit code in the actual tests because that would be silly. So I only reversed a couple of them in this amount of time. So we're going to go take a quick look at those. All right. So back in the Ember 1.x days, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, Luke Skywalker, oh wait. So we have this. Hold on. Sure. Enhance. Working on it. Okay, this is the same one. We're going to presume that this one is actually going to work, and I'm going to mop up the font size. I'm working on it, thank you. Whoops, that went the wrong direction. I could just have, see if I hit the big green button, it takes over my keynote thing as well. So everything over here in the HTML is really boring. The one thing to note is 1.3.0. So this is old. How many people have been writing Ember code since 1.3? Wow, we got some old people around here. So we're going to go ahead and hide that. So the real trick here is what happens if you're iterating over an object in a context that happens to use this. Well, so this happens to be a primitive in this case, and so we each over these view.kiddos, which happens to be max, and this script tag, and then if you happen to run it with JavaScript, it gets inserted within our HTML. So we used to have a escaping issue for the way in which views were implemented. We have a couple other things that are similar to this. They all showed up like right around the same point in time because we started looking at one particular area of the code base, and so we saw link 2 ending up here. Okay, so we saw link 2. You had the ability to pass an attribute that was HTML, say title equals something, and then that would result in a boundary overflow, if you will, and now you've jumped out of those quotes and you're able to add a new event handler. We had the same sort of thing with a group helper, where it would allow you to pass an attribute in and it would group over it, and then it would combine everything actually by concatenation, and then you end up with, whoops, more HTML problems that you didn't actually expect to be in there. So those are a couple of old ones. My next question is, how many of you have been paying attention recently? Like last weekish, yeah. We happen to have this guy. Where's my local host? Okay, so this one is one of my new fun favorites, and I'd like to quickly mention Robert for going ahead and solving this one for us. This one was announced 12 days ago, but we found it about 32 days ago, just before Christmas. We didn't release it on Christmas because that would have been a really mean thing to do to all of you. So we happened to find a nice, neat little way where handlebars and HTML bars didn't actually know what it was doing, and it could masquerade as a safe string. And so we'll look at a little bit of the code here. So this is modern Ember, so it actually looks a little bit more like what you would expect. So how do you know that something is a HTML bar's safe string? Turns out the answer is if it has a string property. Correct, no longer. But, so let's say you happen to have an API that responds with something and you run JSON parse on it and happens to have ASDF and a string property, but you were just using model.asdf and whoops. Now, whatever happens to appear at the string is treated as a safe string and inserted into your application without any additional escaping. And so now we have this nice little Google image over here, which when it shows up on your page, happens to throw a nice little alert and whoops. So that's actually what the vulnerability is. The solution was we actually stopped duck typing the safe string with the string property and instead have it being duck typed with the toHTML function. And you can't actually accidentally JSON parse a function. And so that protects us from the issue. We've got new ideas for symbols and other weird things in the future, but it makes it more difficult to include multiple versions of HTML bars into Node and then being able to say type of or instance of X. So there's weird complications that make that less than ideal. So you're wondering, okay, now that you've scared me to death and I'm going to go home and cry into my beer, or cry into your beer now and then go home, what should I do for my actual Ember application? The world out there is kind of a scary place for JavaScript applications. So how do you make sure you're safe? Well, first off, Ember install Ember CLI content security policy. Most of you already have this in your applications because you built your applications already. You have them already created. But if you happen to have, say, used a beta version or the 2.x that was accidentally tagged as the most recent release branch for a little while, or any one of these weird things, you ended up in a situation where the blueprint for Ember CLI no longer has Ember CLI content security policy in it by default. And why is that? Well, that's because the API, what? Ask me later. Well, I have some ideas. The API sucks. The tooling for it in browsers is horrendous. We really we want so much more out of this interface and we're not getting it. Your applications, just by default, you're not designing with this in mind. You're integrating with historical systems that don't really design or aren't really designed to take advantage of this feature. But seriously, there's nothing else you can do on the web that makes your application more secure. It's the only thing that you can do that allows you to completely eliminate an entire class of vulnerabilities. You can say no unsafe inline JavaScript, which means that you pretty much can't be XSS'd anymore. If you say no unsafe inline CSS, there's no way to jump the boundary or add some weird style hacks. There's so many things that it actually protects you from just by setting a few properties that it's crazy not to try and adopt it. So we're using it at LinkedIn to help protect us from the misfeatures of the early web and our naivete in 1999. So next up, Ember Security. This is our security policy as part of Ember.js. When you're reading the source code or flipping through some Ember community project and you find a possible vulnerability, possible weakness even, Ember, as a project, we've got an explicit process for reporting vulnerabilities and things that you might be able to exploit. And so we have a responsible disclosure policy and how instruction-wise to report the bug. And that jerk in the back over there named Robert Jackson, give us a wave. Hey, is our current security coordinator. And we at LinkedIn have just gone through the process of talking with him. And so as an end result, a message was sent to this thing, the security mailing list. Who is not subscribed to the security mailing list? Not subscribed. So y'all can now stop paying attention to me. I'll wait. I'm not even kidding. Google.com/forum/Ember Security. Sign up for that right now. It's sent 7 emails in like 3.5 years. You're not going to be swamped in them. It's absolutely worth it. And you need to make sure that you keep your applications up to date because it's relatively simple to reverse engineer the vulnerability. And this is the one time where I'm really glad that everybody's looking down at their phones. The other thing is app design decisions. So when you're building your application, you need to make sure you think about defense in depth. You need to be a little bit paranoid, and you got to make it impossible. I'm not going to say impossible because that's a little bit overpromise, underdeliver, but impossible in the sense of making sure that you've made it as unlikely as possible. So even when you're wrong, even when you've built something with a weakness, the defense in depth and the paranoia help protect you. You have your one thing that you've done wrong, but because you've only done one thing wrong, that means that maybe everything else stays standing. And then once you've taken that weakness, you now treat that weakness as if you have some other vulnerability that allows you to feed it random data. And so we always assume that any attacker can feed any arbitrary data into a weakness. So we treat each weakness as if it were itself an individual security vulnerability. And we patch over them. Everybody should probably steal these 3 lines of JavaScript. This is our solution to jQuery being so friendly in executing your JavaScript. What if you just take away its ability to evaluate code in the global context and tell it that when you go from text to script, please don't run eval. That's a really bad idea. So we wanted to make sure that even though we've told our developers, make sure you always specify the data type, we want to make sure that as they're going through and specifying that data type, that they don't make mistakes. But how many of you are perfect? I love how the LinkedIn table raises their hand. So even inside of LinkedIn, we assume, even though we're all perfect, we don't trust our developers. We patch over jQuery. We even patch over SafeString. We dropped the triple stash from our code base. You can't get any code past the linter with the triple stash in it. We can't have these sorts of class of security vulnerabilities come in. And so we've taken them and extended them to be much, much safer because safe by default is pretty much the only way to go. And you must remain vigilant. Monitor your logs for weird behavior. Have additional checks on your security that aren't just actually in your code base because you can't expect to catch everything, but you can maybe catch it on the back end and identify what happened. It makes the problem of, hey, our database got dumped, but we don't really know how much and to whom and which ones of you are going to get your credit cards stolen and how many firstborn children will be sacrificed at the altar of identity theft, etc. So you want to have alerts and monitoring for behavior that's outside of the norm on your logs. So that's kind of how you want to build your Ember applications. Make sure everything is good to go. Make sure everything is safe. So with that, y'all have any questions? This gentleman all the way over here on the left.
How to use raw HTML helper in handlebars or HTML bars? What using 3 equals in templates?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble.
3 equals.
Triple equals?
Yeah. You miss this.
So using triple equals inside of templates, triple stashes or triple equals?
Oh, yeah. In HTML bars, it's, yeah.
Yeah. So our solution for that is we use attributed strings. So when we actually are parsing any HTML that we are actually receiving from the server or anywhere else as HTML, we actually take it and dissolve it into individual components of HTML, and where we actually say, hey, we're going to take this and turn it into a set of tokens. We go ahead and divide the content from the control, so that when we recombine them in the template, recombine them in the application, that we know those pieces are going to be safe. Did that answer your question?
But if you have some rich HTML,
even with rich HTML, we parse it either server-side or on input to make sure that it is actually parsed, and we take it and then split it into attributed text. Yes. All right, this gentleman back here.
Just your slide on the CLI or Ember install Ember CLI content security. Isn't it Ember security Ember content security policy, or is that different?
Did I skip them?
I think there might have been policy at the end.
Okay. It is Ember CLI content security policy. It's a RWJ Blue special. So if you actually need to make sure you install that, please do so. Other questions? We do. It's called JSecure, but it's actually proprietary for LinkedIn. We're terribly sorry. But you could do a very simplistic BNF parser and don't actually implement 100% of HTML and only implement the pieces that you expect to be correct. Well, so the question was, can you open source or what is the code that you're using for doing your parsing? And the answer is we're using something called JSecure. Now the problem with JSecure is that it is proprietary for us. The whitelist for all of that is very, very small, because if you use like SVG data or SVG use, those are actually attack vectors. And there's these little weird random attributes on all sorts of weird HTML elements that can really screw you. Mr. Jackson.
So the parser that HTML bars uses internally is a simple HTML tokenizer. You can actually use that if you really, really need to. I would generally just say don't use triple curlies, don't like emit raw HTML, but sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you have features that have to do that. But you can also use the simple HTML bar HTML tokenizer to do some of the tokenization. You have to figure out what to do with it, of course, but it helps. You don't have to write a regex to parse HTML. Don't do that. That's what I want to do.
Not regex. If you're going to do anything, do use a BNF parser or an actual HTML5 parser. More questions?
Just curious, you pointed out at NSA earlier, and just wondering if LinkedIn is not working really with NSA. I heard they actually create the UI, so NSK can access all the data that we have on the LinkedIn profile. Is that true?
I can not comment on that, part one. And two, I don't know anything about that, and I can say that with complete confidence.
What practices do you recommend doing or not doing to make your Ember app most compatible with content security policy?
Serve all of your content from the CDN. Make sure you don't need inline scripts. Don't use any of the weird prefix, postfix, suffix, code insertion blocks inside of the application. Use fewer things from Bower. Make sure Bower is literally the worst. all of these things are relatively simple on an individual basis, but they are hard to make sure that you maintain across the entire application as you're going through it. So one of the remaining holdouts that we have inside of LinkedIn is we use a technique we call Big Pipe, which allows us to flush our API data in as script blocks, and those get executed and pulled into our data store by actual code shipped down from the server in inline script tags. We're fixing that probably in the next week or two, at which point we will be able to have all of the content security policy for all of the settings set to their near maximum. And so we're very excited about that, because that means that we basically aren't going to get that call at 3 a.m., hey, by the way, you've got a security problem. So that one's something we're excited about. So it's entirely possible. Like, if we can do it at LinkedIn with all of our legacy and everything else that we've got, y'all can do it in your applications, I promise. Any more questions? Well, on that uplifting ending, I work at LinkedIn. We're always interested in talking to Embereños and all of you skilled JavaScript developers in this room. And so I've worked at LinkedIn now for 10 months, and it's been the best experience of my life in terms of a career. And we're doing a whole bunch of really crazy, ridiculous things with Ember, and we're very, very excited about the future of Ember inside of LinkedIn and external to LinkedIn. So thank you very much.